Hey, just wanted to say we started a Patreon. It's patreon.com/wideflank. If you want to support the pod, we would be very thankful for that. We want to play a lot of games, and video games are really expensive. And Zoom is expensive, and everything's expensive. And we want to do it all and do it through you guys. And thanks for listening.
Welcome to Wide Flank.
Hey, welcome to Wide Flank. This is Alon. I'm joined by two good friends, two musicians. We got Damon from the band Infinity Shred, Luke from the band Anamanaguchi. We're here to discuss the music of Doom 2016. What's up, y'all?
What's up, dude?
Yeah, thanks for having us on the show.
Dude, thanks for coming on. So Danny, Tenney, and I just finished last episode talking for like almost 2 hours about Doom, how much we loved it. Eventually we got to just how fucking good the Mick Gordon soundtrack is and how it sort of colored the game and everything you do in the game. And yeah, so when did you guys play Doom? And just give me like a little background on your Doom experience, I guess.
I think I played 2016 a little over a year after its release.
Cool.
On my roommate at the time's PS4. I was shocked at how much time I spent with it and how much I enjoyed it. Like I haven't spent a lot of time on shooters in a long time. Like that was the first one that I'd really invested in since I played through all of the first fucking COD at James's apartment when I was there one day in like 2011. And I think that kind of soured me a little on the genre just because I was like, all right, sure. That's what everyone's into. And yeah, I played through the originals a lot on computer as a kid. So it was a cool return to form.
Yeah.
What about you, Damon?
I bought it whenever they first ported it to the Switch on Teddy's like recommendation to check it out. And I was just like, dude, I'm not really feeling this. And then last year I was just like deep in pandemic zone. I was just like, I'm going to fucking play through Doom. Like this is the time. Was just alone in my girlfriend's basement, just like had set up my sad gamer corner and played through.
I'm imagining like caution tape, like no one enter. This is my fucking corner.
No, it was just like whatever random furniture was around. I just like scrapped into a corner. It was just like, yeah, this is where I game every day, all day now. Because what else am I gonna do?
Yeah,
that's a pretty dope, brutal place to play Doom.
Yeah,
it's kind of like have you seen those pictures of like someone playing? There are these really good pictures of like a CRT in like a wooden cabin with Dark Souls running on it.
Yeah,
and then there's the other one with like Bloodborne running on like on a plasma in a completely white room.
Yeah, where's the ideal like Doom location? It's like in a sandstorm or something, like with your Switch. It's like like 140 degrees outside.
It's like in the middle of a club dance floor with no AC.
Oh, yeah,
in like an isolated sound box.
Yeah, it's the brutality comes through the gameplay, and it's funny that you brought that story up, Damon, because I know that Teddy bought it back when it came out in 2016, and he did the same thing. He played like an hour or two and was like, this kind of sucks, like not for me, and didn't play it until we did it again, and then we all loved it. But
I mean, I did that with Mass Effect also. I put it down and then like came back to it half a year later and was just like, oh, this is actually the best thing that's ever happened to my life.
Like, my favorite game of all time. That's funny.
Could I ask what turned you around on it, Damon?
What was that?
Could I ask what turned you around on it?
I have no idea. I think I honestly kind of thought like I got really sick of the game over sound because I kept dying. I was like, the sound is stupid. And then I came back to it and like just died less. So I guess I was just rolling and having fun. Yeah.
There you
I
go.
mean, you have to be in the right mindset for some games. Like the next game we're playing for the Gameclub is Subnautica.
Oh yeah.
And the first time I booted it up, I just like was very not mentally prepared. And I was just like, I can't like dive in right now, literally dive into the ocean right now.
Yeah.
So I got to figure this out. But yeah. So what was your guys' first impression of the music? Like for me, I a lot of people told me, including both of you, going in before I played it, like, oh my God, the soundtrack is sick.
Yeah.
But like no one really commented on the game. Everyone was just like, oh, Doom's 2016. Yeah, good soundtrack. And I was like, okay, weird. And then, but I didn't know what it was going to sound like.
Yeah.
And then I wasn't really that into the game, but I got more and more into the game, and the music synergizes more and more with you getting in and all that stuff. And I was just wondering what your guys' like first impression was. Damon, you can go.
Yeah. It was a funny confluence of events for me because at the end of 2016, like around when it had come out, at the Game Awards, Matt Halpern, the drummer for Periphery, played live with Mick Gordon.
That's right.
For doing the soundtrack live. And like, I remember watching that, and then shortly after we had gotten the tour offer from Periphery, and I was just like, yeah, these guys are like gamers, I'm down.
Yeah.
And then was just like, oh man, there's just like this kind of like djent era going down, like the post Meshuggah djent era that was growing. That was just like much more brutal and sound designy instead of just like straight metal.
Right.
I think I definitely heard the soundtrack well before I played the game, like maybe 6 months, a year before. And I remember by the time that I got around to it, I was so like familiar with the songs that it felt almost like I was like watching a movie that had all of these great needle drops in it. I was like,
weird.
Oh, hell yeah, this song, fuck yeah, this song is sick. Because it is like a very tightly composed soundtrack, but it's also fucking awesome. Like that's easily the best Cybergrind album that's come out in the past. Like
Cybergrind, I've never heard that, but it makes perfect sense to me.
Well, dude, Luke, what's actually funny is the two things like the soundtrack reminds me of are like obviously like a ton of like djent heavy metal bands, but also like a noise group you got me into many years back, Empty Set.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Like it's just like so heavy on that sound design, and I think that's why I was so into the soundtrack even before I played it, because I was just like, this is bringing like two things that like people don't usually like, but you don't usually find one person who likes both of these things, and it's like brought them together seamlessly.
It's interesting the way that he uses, like, in the same way that Empty Set uses the randomness of distortion as a color in their palette. Like that is the same thing that Mick Gordon ended up doing. I don't know if either of y'all watched, but there's a really great GDC talk that he did about his composition process.
Music guy intensive that like a lot of it was over my head. Like it was like for strictly music people almost, you know what I mean?
Music and game design, yeah. You know, since it was a GDC talk, it was definitely geared towards that audience. But like to sum it up, like the way that he ended up processing everything was taking the most simple sounds possible, like just a straight up sine wave, and running it through layers and layers of distortion. Like he made a 16 pedal array of like splitting things, putting them through distortion, through EQ, through compression, putting that through another layer of stuff, putting that through a like crappy little practice amp, and then summing all that together. And the way that ends up artifacting is weird as hell. It like that is the sound of hell that he found, is just complete destruction of base humanity. It's pretty like it's weirdly heady for what it is because it's so sound design oriented, but like it's perfect. Nothing else sounds like it.
It feels like a technical achievement alongside being like just a cool album with good songs, you know, because there's, like you said, there's all of this like gear shit that's happening, and like I have this synth from the Soviet Union and these pedals and the chainsaw running through my synth and like all that stuff. But then there's also just like, and it's, you know, Mick Gordon made the soundtrack, but also the implementation of the sound is also really special. All the engineers and designers, because everything sort of works forwards and backwards. Like every 4 bars loops seamlessly. Every track has like a quiet part, a loud part, a super loud part, a hype part, a dead part, like, and it needs to be like every track needs to have like all of these different triggers because different stuff is happening during everyone's experience of playing the game.
Yeah.
And I just like that, like trying to wrap my head around all that stuff, like sort of blew me away.
Yeah, I feel like there are plenty of games, like regardless of how good the music is, that stuff is implemented pretty, not perfectly. I won't say poorly, but not perfectly. Where like all of a sudden you'll hear like enemy encounter music when you're like, there's nothing around. And like if Doom had messed that up, it would have been way less good of a game than it is.
Yes.
And all of that I think was pretty perfectly implemented, because I never felt like any of the audio cues were like offbeat at all. I always felt like they were happening at the right moments. And I always felt like the most satisfying thing was just when you got like one of the glory kills on a beat. Like,
but it always happened, right? Like that's one of the magical things, right? It felt like every time you glory kill, like the music ducks right at that moment. You rip their jaw off, smash it against the wall, and then the music comes right back in, like they're playing for you or something.
Yeah. They programmed it so like whenever you get those glory kills, there's just like a sick guitar dive bomb, and then you're just like right back into the next measure that was happening in the song.
It's so well paced. Like the gameplay with the songs, with the audio design, not to mention just the way that the sound design melds with the soundtrack, with the like ambient noise of wherever you are. It makes this, it's overwhelming, but it's not overwhelming in a way that turns you off from wanting to play it. Like I wanted to live in it. I wanted to like get the fuck out of there by killing everything. It's really satisfying is a word that I keep coming back to.
Yeah.
Like the way that people talk about the sound of the Doom shotgun, like this legendary sound, it is all very immediately impactful and satisfying. They really match the speed of play so nicely.
Yeah. On the note of you saying it's like there are overwhelming parts, but like I was wondering from a music, from like a metal perspective almost, it's super, to me, like polyrhythmic and complex sounding, you know, like that super like metal shreddy where I'm just like, this is crazy. But at the same time, it's very predictable, you know, like everything has to be like, almost in the sense that like every dance song is 4/4 because people have to dance to it or whatever, you know, it's like, it has both going on at the same time where it sounds complex, but like subconsciously I know what's happening and I feel everything coming, you know what I mean?
Something that I think helps with that a lot is that the way that it's written, the way that the riffs themselves are composed, and the way the instrumentation works, it's not as though, like, you're absolutely right, there's a lot of weird rhythmic and weird like harmonic stuff happening, like that is absolutely not, you know, standard. It's very like intense metal structure, but at the same time, it's not composed in a way that is meant to be like, it's turned down djent. You know, like you take a band like Meshuggah, which is built around having things that are very complex, but there's also like a very constant, you know, snare in there, so you can still headbang consistently through the entire thing. It's doing that, but it has to maintain just a very steady pace to keep you driving, to keep you like tuned in, not to be like caught up in what's happening. So like riffs are all over the place, but I feel like I don't know. I'm a drummer. The first thing that I really paid attention to was the drums. And they stay pretty straight the entire time. They're not like blasting, but they're not meant to like trip you up with ridiculous polyrhythms the way that someone like Lamb of God might have these really complex patterns, you know? It feels as though it's keeping you on the dial.
I was going to build on what Luke said about like there are a lot of really technical metal nerds who like love gent stuff who like don't respect bands who like don't have weird time signatures. And they'll be like, oh, that's not like real gent, get out of my house. But like Luke was saying, this is it turned down to like not necessarily be accessible, but like so that like everyone who has ever heard music will just like know that there is like a rhythm they can keep. Yeah.
That's like making it sound sort of complex, but keeping it actually really simple is like part of the good parts. I wanted to listen to Hellwalker for a little, which is the menu music, and then turns into the one where he used the chainsaw, like famously run through a synthesizer for some of the sound. And I just think it's super sick. Yeah, so
sick.
Like
it's so good.
One of the things, it's so fucking sick. But one of the things also, like, just picking up where we left off, like, and Hellwalker, I think is a great example. Like, I don't think it ever even goes halftime. The whole, like, it feels like halftime. Like, that track feels like halftime. Like, you're like nodding at that pace, but like because you're playing a game and every user has their own pace and whatever, it has to maintain not halftime, but it feels like it. It's cool.
Yeah, it's trudging. It is like, it feels like watching something happen in slow motion.
Yeah.
Like the cinematic part of it is definitely really, really, yeah, it's immersive, it feels like. I know that Mick Gordon talked a lot about 9-inch nails as a specific reference point for a lot of this stuff, and that comes through a lot, and like not just the sound design, but in the like Trent Reznor oppressive cinematic scoring way that feels, you know.
Well, the other cool thing is I feel like at this point we're also like pretty like if you've played a lot of like AAA games in the last 10 years, you're pretty conditioned to feel like or expect there to be some kind of orchestral element, and that's almost completely absent in here, but he does a lot of the same type of arrangements as you would expect from that, but it's all like super processed guitar sounds.
Right.
Totally.
Yeah.
That's a good call. Yeah.
Like in that one, I thought strings were coming in, but it's totally just shredding.
Yeah, it's just shredding. That is another really good, interesting point about just game music in general, because AAA, I feel like, it's either like an orchestral, like almost a film score,
Mhm.
or it's like GTA and it's just like pop music on the radio. And there's like no in between of like sick music. It's maybe starting to come up now, but for AAA to sound like this was like very surprising. In the same way that the game sort of surprises you with like the gameplay. It's super not COD and not like those kind of games, you know?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
One of the interesting things in the no clip doc that I thought I could pass to you guys sort of in your experiences is like they asked Mick Gordon how like a game studio or whoever hires you, any sort of client will be like, I want it to sound like this. And how do you figure out the language to be like, okay, I know what this is, I know exactly what you mean, and I know like how I'm gonna make it. Like that feels like a very large disconnect depending on who you're working for or working with, and something that's like a difficult bridge to cross, you know?
Mm-hmm. It's so client dependent. Yeah, I feel like Luke's probably dealt with it way more, but Nate and I in Infinity Shred worked on a soundtrack for a movie, and just like every time we started talking about something, they just would come back with like a much different, and I won't say like uneducated term, I'll just like a different term, and we just like had to adopt that one for the rest of the job.
Right.
Yeah.
It's absolutely like, it's frustrating when something feels so, I'll know it when I hear it. Like people come in with a very strong concept, and that has to get translated to every aspect of a game to have it feel as cohesive as something like Doom.
Yeah. But the thing that's really clear with a soundtrack like Doom is everyone involved knew what they wanted, because like soundtracks fall apart when someone like comes in and like their only reference is like, I don't know, Stranger Things was cool, do that, and don't actually have any like heart behind that decision. But like everyone going in, like the genting wasn't a surprise, right? Like that was a reference going in. Everyone knew they wanted some elements like that, and that was something a trope they were going to play off of.
Well, if anything, what's interesting about this one is that like the original design doc, or the original like reference that they gave to Mick, was that they didn't want guitars. Like they were like, we want to avoid that. But they ended up there because of the natural progression of this. Like they were getting to this point with the sound design, and at a certain point, Mick realized this is a fucking Doom game.
Yeah.
Of course it's going to have heavy guitars.
It feels like they all realized that with the, not just the soundtrack, but the game too, right? Yeah, that was from that GDC talk. The initial like, I don't know, email or whatever they gave him was, Doom is about demons on Mars. You have a shotgun. You have to send them back to hell. No guitars. And I love synths. that was like all he got for like, you know, first draft or whatever, which I thought was really funny. I should mention, because we're using the word gent a lot. Yeah. And I feel like people don't know what that is, but it's like, what's that? What's
onomatopoeia.
It called? Onomatopoeia. It's an onomatopoeia of the actual like guitar downstroke metal, like
exactly.
And it's, I guess, a genre. Is it a genre of a subgenre of a type of metal?
It's a genre the same way chiptune is a genre, in that like the people who make it don't want to be called that, and they will always get called it
because it's the only like descriptor or something.
Yeah. There are a lot of heavy technical bands that are gent, but not every gent band is. It's one of those things, you know.
Yeah, it's a square rectangle.
Yeah,
gotcha.
Precisely.
Gotcha.
Yeah, the vision, the shared vision of everything about it really seems like it made this easier. You know, like and not to mention like this is for all intents and purposes a work for hire gig for Mick Gordon. But they also brought him in because they wanted him. You know, like I think that they were super amiable to him making these decisions at a certain point, because he knows what he's doing, and they're deferring to him to like gel with the rest of the team. Right?
And I think that's what I was more trying to get at, is like I feel like a lot of the times you'll like go see a cool indie movie or play a new game, and it'll be like music by this person, and like, you know, some people, sometimes myself, are very excited by like who's doing the soundtrack.
Yeah.
And you go to like watch it, and then you're just like, soundtrack was good, but it had nothing to do with like the sound of the people who made it.
Right.
And there was obviously like clear intent of like, why him? Yeah, like why is Mick Gordon?
Speaking of why him, I want to play the first track, which leads into the second track. I Dogma into Rip and Tear, because I Dogma is like that hell voice or whatever, saying like who the Doomslayer is, and it's so fucking sick and new. And then it leads into that like incredible riff, which I think from the original Doom games, like it was like a MIDI version in like 91 or whatever, and then he just made it sick. Let's play it.
Shred it.
In the first age, in the first battle, when the shadows first lengthened, one stood. He chose the path of perpetual torment. In his ravenous hatred, he found no peace, and with boiling blood, he scoured the umbral plains, seeking vengeance against the Dark Lords who had wronged him. And those that tasted the bite of his sword named him the Doomslayer.
I'm gonna fade it out, even though it feels really cruel, but
dude, that. So without seeing the game, I had visuals I've just like never thought about with this music before. Which like whenever I hear those deep like voiceover things, the first thing I think of are like all the hardstyle artists who like.
Dude, I had that in my head 100%, even after
like,
playing.
Which is like I think why in my head I was just like, I want to play it at a club, because I'm just imagining the Climax Festival, just like around way too many people, overwhelmed by the amount of demons.
Yes.
But then when the guitars came in, I was just like, Tony Hawk. And just imagine the Doomslayer skating around hell.
Yeah, I don't know if you listened to the Wide Flank episode, but one of the things one of the id guys said at a GDC talk is he wants it to feel like Bruce Lee on a skateboard with a shotgun.
With a shotgun.
So there you go.
Yeah,
that's the vibe.
So sick.
So I'm gonna have to download that mod tonight. The Doomslayer skin into the Tony Hawk remake.
Fuck yeah! Now you're cooking. It's for all intents and purposes just a really, really good metal record. Yeah. Like it somehow manages to ride that line between being a great score to everything that's happening in the game and standing alone as this really solid genre piece of work.
Yeah,
like it does what it's trying to do so well that it stands alone.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Like I remember seeing that Game Awards live performance and being underwhelmed because the soundtrack has such a presence to it that I feel like the only way that I would want to see it live is like Death Clock style, like 9 people on stage shredding at any given time, full fucking pyro, Dillinger strobes.
Yeah.
It's so good.
Or who's the band that plays the like 8-bit game soundtracks live? Like to the game speedruns?
Bit Brigade. Brigade.
That would be like awesome. But I felt the same way watching that performance. I was like, it's cool to watch Matt drumming, and like no shade to Mick Gordon, but I was just like, he's just like running around the stage a lot, and like it's kind of like when you watch like a Drake live performance, but there was way less production, so it was just Drake running around with a fucking guitar.
Yeah, it was like a don't meet your heroes moment. It was like you did a great job, but like you're not as cool as this sound.
Not
so
even that,
like,
it's just like you already proved yourself. Like you can stay home.
Seriously. Yeah.
But that's also I also don't want to make that sound like I'm talking shit on the way that Mick Gordon presents it live, because that was a Game Awards performance. There can only be so much production that goes into that.
He did what he could. Yeah.
It's I just have it presents itself so fully that a live performance would have to be as overblown, intense, like as playing the game.
Yeah. Yeah, I want like blood coming down from the ceiling. But I was gonna say it's cool. It's cool. Yeah, it's cool that the soundtrack also isn't. I feel like this is normally the case. Like the soundtrack goes along chronologically with the game, but it doesn't at all. It's just like in album order. Like it's just like this is. I'm gonna make an album. He even says, and I think it's in the No Clip doc that like he basically sent them everything, and was just like hope it makes it into the game. Like that was it. The next time he heard his music was when the game came out, and he was watching streamers on Twitch. And was like,
that's awesome. I didn't know
that.
And
then he watched it and was like, this guy's like nodding his head like sick. I did a good job. Yeah. But like he didn't know anything about how it was implemented or like, which is, I thought was really cool.
Which like makes it so much more of a bummer that he had all the drama with them on the second one.
Yeah, I didn't.
Right.
So what happened? Do you know roughly what happened?
The full details, but roughly is he basically didn't get the final say on like the mix and master and wasn't completely happy with it. And like playing that game, I still thought it was great, but like also being a musician, like I know that must have hurt a lot to have not had that control when there was so much acclaim for the first one. Because it's not like this was just like a sequel job. This was like passion project because of how much like love and love for the first one there was.
Totally. Not to mention that like the amount of effort that went into it was even more so for Eternal because of that passion around it. Like he, maybe a year or two before the game's release had this huge open call for a screaming choir.
Yeah, that was so sick.
That like brought in people to like record live in this space, obviously pre-COVID, but like many people came to participate in all of this. So I think a lot of it was that he felt as though that effort and his passion and his contribution, not to mention like the community passion around it, was like it felt diminished by that, which is tough. Yeah,
that's a fucking bummer for sure. Yeah.
Politics,
Matt had a question, which I could just throw in here. Matt Androck on Discord. He said, what are each of your relationships to metal like? Has the Doom soundtrack changed that at all?
What do you think, Damon?
I think, well, to answer the first part of the question first, like, I wasn't that much of a metalhead growing up, mainly because I didn't really like screaming vocals until like a lot later in my life. So I loved a lot of like early Iron Maiden, because it was just kind of like punk singing, but like I always loved the shreddy metal guitars. But the Doom soundtrack actually kind of like denotes when I started like getting more into like the djent technical stuff, because before that, it was actually Luke put me on also to this band Vatnet Viskar, who we became friends with. Like that was the majority of like my metal was a lot of like American black metal, not the European real shit, but like,
I feel like your band has also gone through so many progressions of like getting more metal in certain ways.
Yeah, it was funny because when Infinity Shred started, it was kind of like the height of like EDM becoming a thing, and a lot of just like people in America just didn't really understand like electronic music fully yet, and they were like, Infinity Shred's EDM, and we were just like, no, but we'll like come get paid.
Exactly. We'll play your show.
Thanks for booking us, I guess. Shit.
But then like it was around 2016, 2017, just like more and more metal bands, like including Horse the Band, just started giving us like tour offers, and it was just like that's where we ended up falling in. So my relationship with metal was more just like it happened to me versus I was seeking it out.
That's sick.
I think I started listening to a lot of metal in high school. I spent a lot of time with like, fast technical things. Like either mathy bands or like a lot of melodic death metal, like the Black Dahlia Murder and things like that. And then as I got more into electronic music, like one of the reference points for me for this kind of soundtrack was a band called Gangustron. That was based out of they're from New York. They put out a new record earlier this year.
Yeah, and it's just completely different.
It's completely different.
It's solid though.
Yeah, it's really good. But their whole deal was that they were screamy, mathy, progressive, had melodic elements, but their setup was a singer, a guitar player, and a synth player with all drums and like a lot of basses, just two backing tracks, all MIDI. With a synced up light show that I'm going to go on record as saying was like an early inspiration for what I wanted to get out of Anamanaguchi at a certain point. Totally. But that super tight, super edited, like very heavy thing was my reference point towards this. So and then I, also at the same time was getting into other screamy, nasty drum machine bands like Cloacal Kiss and Agoraphobic Nosebleed, which, by the way, Altered States of America is a great album. 99 tracks in like, I don't know, 25 minutes or something like that. So like this felt like a very natural progression of that for me. Like as a bridge between electronic music and heavy music, like I wouldn't, to answer the question, I wouldn't say that it like changed the way that I look at it, but I do think it is a high benchmark for the way that those two things intersect. Yeah.
I also wouldn't say it like changed it for me, but the thing that it made me like more excited and hopeful for was like, I've always wanted to get into like game soundtrack stuff eventually. And like, it made me more hopeful that like I can go into making a game soundtrack, like making the music exactly how I want it to be versus having to like tailor it to just like a sound that they want for the game.
Right. Yeah. Make it sound like this instead of making music you love. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
How much different is it composing for a thing, like composing for a film or composing for a game? Like how different is your process than making music for yourself or your band or, whatever?
It's goal oriented. Goal oriented is the first like word combo that I use to describe that kind of thing, where like what makes this soundtrack feel so good is that it is goal oriented in a way that is playing to the strengths of the composer. But it really it's hard to keep track of how many different checkboxes you're hitting. Has to be engaging. For a lot of games, they would want it to also be some kind of like, there's the Brian Eno definition of ambient music, where it has to be as listenable as it is ignorable, which is something
I've never heard that. That's kind of sick. Yeah.
A lot of game designers, want that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Like I cannot, there's, what am I trying to say here? Yeah, has to be thematic, has to also be something that you listen to very passively, has to not distract from the action at hand. In fact, it has to play up that action at hand without, it's like designing a great suit or something that you wear to an award show.
Yeah.
Like,
that's a good way to put it.
Well, actually, like for how intense of a soundtrack it is, like the Brian Eno thing does kind of come into play, because like
it does.
While I was playing it last year, like I had it just like on pause, like still just like the pause menu stuff playing over the speakers for like long periods of time at a time, and like never felt like it was destroying me. Like I was just like happy it was there when I remembered, and it wasn't bothering me when it wasn't, which is it's a crazy thing to pull off with this style of music.
Yeah, it's back to the first thing that we talked about, where it's like it synergizes so well with playing the game, and you're in this moment where you're low on health and you're just getting ammo and you're just kind of like looking for a secret or solving some like platformer type of puzzle, and like it is background music in those moments. Like it's just like an atmospheric thing that you don't even really think about, and then before you know it, you're surrounded by like 40 demons and like jumping off shit and killing everyone, and it's so hype and insane in those moments. And like again, it like dips during your glory kill, and then you fade away, fucking snipe something, and it's so sick.
Something interesting compositionally that I'm thinking about now is like, to the point of it being like you can kind of listen to it forever, is just a note range choice thing that happens with a lot of metal riffs. Like it's all kind of chromatic, and it's all kind of like only staying within a certain range of notes being played at a given time, that it's hard for it to get stuck in your head the way that like something really melodic would. It's pounding and it's rhythmic, and it like has something harmonic happening, but not the same way as like just some other guitar riff would, or like some other like game soundtrack would have like a big sweeping melody that comes in. Like it allows for repeated listening because it is more atmospheric and more memorable for the like rhythm that it's pushing than it is for the actual melody. I think that helps it to like stay listenable for a long time. Yeah,
which is kind of a cool move and like a fuck you to like hyper memorable melodic soundtracks, because he's just like, nah, like the whole thing you're gonna remember.
Absolutely.
Not just this one moment, like you're gonna remember all of this.
Let me play Bfg Division, which I think is like the most popular track on the album.
So tight.
It's funny to talk about the melody because this has like one of the very few moments where it's not like you remember the melody, you just remember the like burn, you just remember like the high peaks, and it's a different feeling. Let me get in there a little. Should I like fast forward to when it's like I don't know how long it takes. I mean, I want to keep listening to it, but like, it's a podcast and shit. Yeah. But like, it's like, that is like the most melodic moment in the entire soundtrack. And it's like 3 notes on like only the very peaks of the song. It's so sick.
Totally.
What that song makes me think of is like in the creative process, like, especially once you're like at the studio stage recording a band, is when you start soloing tracks and like you hear it not all together because you're trying to fine tune all the elements in the mix. Like you'll be like, wow, this song would absolutely be garbage if all this other stuff wasn't happening. There's so many moments in early Infinity Shred stuff where we would listen to just Nate's guitars and be like, we are a fucking terrible band.
Like, what the hell is this?
Like one of the worst things like ever. It's just like so butt rocky, but because all the other stuff is there, and like that lead melody is like, it's like Tom Morello, where it's like so close to being really corny, but it's so perfectly like dialed in that like it just hits.
And it doesn't last also, right? Yeah. It's not like that's like a minute long of this like theremin-y organ playing. It's just like a little taste and then back down. Yeah.
That was one of the things that I remember about that Game Awards performance, is that when that synth comes in live at that show, it's like, this is not tucked in. It's a different sound. Like this is just being played on top of everything else.
The mix was so bad.
It was really bad. And it just removed from that experience. Like, to that point that Damon just made of like, all of this is so well attended to. Everything is just so fucking like discreetly sick as part of this whole thing. I remember like when I was in high school, a friend of mine who was in a metal band was telling me like, you know how you write a sick metal or hardcore song? You write a sick part. And then you write another sick part after that. And then you write another sick part after that. And you just play them in a row. So that every time you switch to the next part of the song, someone's like, damn, that's a sick part. It sounds really stupid. But
so
like,
simple.
That's really all it is.
But like the order of the parts is important, because if he wrote that synth part first, that song would suck.
Exactly.
Like, this is the best part of the song.
Or if it was like a less convincing sound. Like if we have a MIDI track for that right now and I just like changed it to just like non-sustained, just like single hit banjo notes, you'd just be like, what the fuck is that doing there? You'd be like, this melody sucks, but the melody's good. And he got the right sound for it.
Right.
It definitely helps that he used, this is going to sound really like snobby maybe, but the idea that he followed through a lot of it using electricity and using actual hardware stuff that gets so heavily processed, if only for the sort of human element of it, like the feeling that like if that were a soft synth and not some busted piece of hardware, and that doesn't mean it had to be the, you know, like old Soviet era synthesizer that he ended up using. It could have been an MS-20. It could have been a Moog. But like the fact that it has these distinct characters and the feeling of moving electricity, keeping things non-stagnant is a big plus for all of that shit.
Well, yeah, I mean, the thing you get out of hardware versus like software synths that like he's definitely playing to is what you were saying that he talked about earlier with all the like distortions and everything, where he wanted like a layer of unpredictability of like how the next thing in his chain was going to affect the sound. Like that's all very predictable in software synths because like there's no capacitors that are like getting old and like giving you a warmer sound. Like it is always as good as it's going to be. But a lot of the older hardware like is cool because it sucks and is dying.
Exactly. Like even with software, like when things start to break, they are programmed to break in a very specific way. So if you start to push a hardware or a software distortion unit or a software compressor too hard, you kind of are going to get the same result every time. But if he's pushing all of these things and like feeding too much information into them, then it's going to be a really sick surprise every time instead.
You guys sound like a bunch of chiptune guys.
Could be.
Fucking old hardware and talking ass. I wonder how much like the original Doom soundtrack, aside from like covering the songs essentially in this style, like I do wonder how much like that really old hardware sound, that really like super new at the time MIDI PC sound that we all like instinctively know. I wonder if that was like part of the influence to go with the all hardware, you know,
the thing that feels
hacking sort of way of going about it.
The thing that feels the most similar to the original soundtrack, weirdly, is not the guitar stuff for me, but it's the drum stuff. Like the drums are the least human part of everything because they're so like tight and programmed, like absolutely sampled replaced, which means that it gets to be the closest to the original like Doom MIDI, like rock and roll ass rock drums, which is interesting.
Let me throw on Harbinger for a little bit. Let's just listen to a little bit of that. It's another really good one. so fucking satisfying every time.
It's crazy. Like, I'm hearing that back. It is so clear how much like Nine Inch Nails influence there is in there. Like, even down to the way that kind of that high guitar line is like fuzzed out, but also tucked back. Like, production decisions sound like fucking Trent Reznor. That's very interesting.
The one thing about that song specifically is, to me, it feels like there was an awareness of what like all of this music together, especially within the context of the game, was going to sound like. Because like, if I just like went to a show for a band I was really excited to see, and like an opening band started like playing that bass line, I'd probably be like, this is kind of corny.
Yeah.
Like, I'm not feeling it. But
Totally.
Because like it's in this context, I'm like,
Yeah.
that's the sickest shit I've ever heard.
Yeah,
Like-
exactly. I was thinking similarly that like
Totally.
me in high school like writes that bass line. Like, I'm listening to like Rage and shit like that, and I'm like, this fucking slays, and I'm just like looping this, you know. But like,
Yeah.
it's so context dependent. And I wanted to bring up, Luke, the Doom 3. The guy who wrote the Doom 3 soundtrack is Chris Vrenna, who was the drummer
right.
from Nine Inch Nails and Manson and other shit like that. And I think he, what's his name, Mick Gordon was like a big fan of Doom 3 and the Doom 3 soundtrack and stuff. So I imagine that like that did influence him big time.
It's almost like hearing that song without seeing. I guess the equivalent of like a live band would be having either a sick music video or just without seeing album art. You know,
Yeah.
like anything that gives a sense of purpose or an artist statement or something like that, in order to be like, this isn't corny, this is hell.
Well, there was a really bad trend in video games around Dead Space era. I forget what year that is, but just like, you know, these games that like have good soundtracks in their own right, then you get to the end credits and then there's just like hard rock song, and you're just so taken out of the experience. And like with the movie, sure, like get out of the theater, but with the game,
Yeah,
you're
get
still
hyped up at the end of the Matrix or something.
You're just so bummed that all of a sudden this shitty song is playing after you just like
That's
finished
funny.
an amazing game. And I think like more and more soundtracks like this one happening has done away with that trend, which is great.
Mhm.
Great for everyone. Should we maybe, do either of you have like a favorite track or a favorite moment or something like that we should end on, and then everyone else can, you know, check it out on their own? It's 31 tracks and over 2 hours long, so we can't do that much more.
I mean, I love Bfg Division, but favorite moment of the game for sure, like the moment where I actually finally was just like, oh no, wait, I want to keep going, was the last moment where like you get the sword taken away from you by the robot doctor guy.
Yeah,
and I was
yeah,
just
yeah.
like, dude, no, like now
Yeah.
I'm invested.
Yeah, they fucking roped us in with
Yeah.
that cliffhanger thing.
Yeah.
The easy answer is BFG Division, and where I think about that in the game is that specific fight where you're fighting everything before you get on an elevator heading down. And then as soon as you press the elevator button, it kicks back in. It's like, oh no, the fight's not done.
Yes, so
but
sick.
I think the song that I listened to the most was SkullHacker on the soundtrack.
Let's play a little SkullHacker, and I guess before we go, like, where can people listen to your guys' music and like find you, follow you on social media and all that shit? Damon, go for it.
We're everywhere. But if you buy Infinity Shred music on Bandcamp, we love you more than if you listen to it on Spotify.
Great answer.
Anamanaguchi.com. If you want to just put the spelling of that on over my face for a second when I say
yeah,
that.
it's like flash it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Sick, guys. Thanks so much for coming on.
Thanks for having us on, man.
Yeah, my pleasure. This is SkullHacker.